Hi, everyone, and welcome to this latest in the series of chats that I'm having with incredible people and organisations who do the most amazing work for animals, rescuing them, caring for them, and advocating for them within the communities that they live in. My fourth interview is with Tracy Wilson, who is a wildlife carer and rescuer and runs Mosswood Wildlife down near Warrnambool in a beautiful part of the world. Tracy, welcome, and thanks so much for chatting with me today. How have you been going throughout this really challenging time of COVID lockdowns and, social distancing and all those sorts of things? How has it affected you?
Actually, COVID has kind of been good to us because we were so busy and desperately needed volunteers, and a lot of people couldn't work. So in many ways, COVID was good to us. And it also reduced the amount of animals hit by cars because there were fewer cars on the road. So it reduced the amount of daily income with critters needing care. So in many ways, COVID was quite good to us. So yeah, we weren't affected too much in a negative way. We weren't affected. And as you would know, our area has been pretty COVID free. I think there was only 5 recorded cases down here. So it made things more difficult so far as social distancing. So we had all our stations set up inside so that people could stay 1.5 metres away. We had hand sanitizer all over the property. Those sort of things were doable because a lot of it's outside. So I think we were some of the lucky ones, actually.
Well, it's a really good point that you make. I mean, it for years, all of us have been saying how, death to wildlife and on roads and everywhere else for that matter there's been a direct correlation between human activity and a detrimental effect on wildlife. And the fact that there are so fewer people on the roads at the moment, although that is getting busier, and it seems to be a direct reduction in the amount of car strikes. So yeah, that seems to be, I'm not a scientist, of course, but that would, if someone was to do a case study, that I think they would find that pretty compelling evidence.
Yeah, I think I've heard it from many other shelters as well, saying the same thing. The interesting thing we did have, though, was an increase in dog attacks.
Okay.
So, yeah, and somebody, I can't remember who I was talking to, said it wasn't just dog attacks on animals, it was dog attacks on people. So that was an interesting curve.
Maybe the dogs were getting a bit annoyed with having their own sort of free time.
Interfering with their daily routine.
Yeah, what are you doing here? Get back to work. Go.
Exactly, can't leave me alone. But we really noticed it because as soon as they lessened restrictions, we had a koala per day for 5 days hit by a car. And then on day 6, we had 3 in one day, all hit by cars. It's yeah, and booboks, the number of booboks we've had in because they chase the moths towards the headlights and then they get hit. So, birds as well as increase. Road toll increases with the amount of traffic. I guess it's logical.
Well, that's all very, very sad news, but I guess it doesn't augur well for when things return completely to normal, which at some stage they're going to have to. Once again, animals will just become a second thought. They'll once again be relegated to the back issue. They'll be the cause for annoyance for people who hit them with cars. They'll be the cause of, well, it's an insurance claim. There's no real value on the lives of those animals, which is deeply distressing. Yeah. Look, and I guess that that's a good segue into talking about the major event that's happened around your life and the shelter's life in recent times, and that's the Cape Bridgewater koala massacre. Now, I heard about this pretty early, and I had the time, thankfully, because we were in between sessions of Parliament. I was one of the first people to be able to drive down there and see what was actually going on, and entered the property along with other people. And the images of those koalas are still quite vividly etched in my mind. It was an extremely traumatic day and an extremely traumatic period for everyone involved in the rescue of those koalas. because not only were we dealing with huge numbers of suffering and dying from bushfires, but then this senseless, unconscionable act happens, and it could have so easily been prevented. And I get sick to my stomach thinking every time of what those koalas went through. And how are your feelings as you reflect back on that day? What happened, and led to these koalas coming into your care?
I sadly wasn't at all surprised. I don't think it's the first time it's happened, and I don't think it will be the last time it happens. I think what people don't realise is blue gum plantations get handed back to owners reasonably often, and there's no carry on with the regulation of what the farmer then does with the trees that have probably a large population of koalas in them. I can see the farmer's point of view or the owner's point of view that it's their land, but there needs to be something in place somewhere along the line that stops this sort of thing happening. I'm quite sure it's happened before. This was made worse, possibly because of the fence. So, the animals couldn't disperse. But if you looked at that area, there was nowhere for them to go anyway, except for a pine plantation opposite. So the koalas are really, in our landscape, are really copping it hard. We have very limited natural habitat left. It's fragmented. It is already under pressure. And the environment seems to have become a dirty word. So we don't have the limelight on land care groups putting in massive plantations, connecting corridors and all that sort of stuff anymore. There doesn't seem to be money to encourage farmers to put in windbreaks. I mean, I could be wrong. It's just I know that it's dropped off from what it was. So it's a kind of depressing place to be for wildlife down here. It was heavily cleared for settlers after the war. And then blue gums took over, which was great because it greened up the landscape beautifully. But unfortunately, the blue gums don't stay, and the koalas have very little places left to go. So I really think that although the blue gum plantation owners are regulated to a point, although I haven't seen a lot of evidence of that really happening lately, when they hand it back, there's how can you tell the owner of the property what to do with their land?
Yeah, so it seems like a sensible thing to do from not just state government but federal government would be to perhaps instigate a moratorium on any further clearing of native habitat, particularly in that area, but widespread across not just the state but in other states too, until an in-depth survey is undertaken into perhaps what population numbers are of different animals that use these forests as home, and to see what possible effect into the future that any future clearing will have on their numbers. Are we pushing these animals to another future extermination or extinction event?
I think, well, our forests are a little bit different from the rest of Victoria because they're not harvesting any of our native forests anymore. They already harvested what they could. So the plantation timber is completely different, but there's huge areas of blue gum plantations and they are planted for a crop. So it's not native bush, it is a crop plantation. And it's very profitable in our area. So it's not going to go away. But what they've got left, the likes of Mount Eccles, which unfortunately had horrendous bushfire go through it, there's very few places that have got native vegetation left for koalas in the area. So your likes of your forests, they're predominantly messmate forest now because when they log the forest, they cut out the timbers that were poorer quality, weren't such good dense timber, and they were unfortunately koala food habitat trees. So what has grown back is predominantly messmate, which is not a good koala food tree. They can't survive on messmate alone. So the actual forests have very little habitat for koalas in them. The fringes will often have manna gums on them. So there's really not that many places for them to go. So they tend to move into flora reserves and private property with remnant bush, and they make themselves very unpopular down here because I hate the word overabundance, but if you look at some of the landscapes here, they look like there is an overabundance of koalas. However, I would rather say underhabited. I don't think that. You know what I mean? Not enough habitat.
Yeah.
But whereas the rest of the state is not in. I mean, I know there's terrible land clearing going on in some areas of old growth forest, and it's just criminal. It is absolutely criminal what they're doing. Species like the gliders that, they've got nowhere to go, absolutely nowhere to go. So I don't know how long they think they can keep logging alive in these old growth forests. So really, sadly, it's a dreaded circle because we need timber and a renewable source. So plantation timber is really the best way to go, because if they're logging plantation timber, they're not logging old growth forest. But unfortunately for the koalas, the most profitable blue gum plantation area is southwest Victoria, where the highest and most dense population of koalas is. So they can't keep harvesting at the rate they were, certainly, and not keep having incidences, because where are these refugees going to go?
Yeah, and I guess that's the nub of the problem, isn't it? It's an ever-decreasing circle for these koalas, and eventually there has to come a tipping point for them. Look, as a bit more tacking on to what actually happened in Cape Bridgewater, look, I'm so thankful for, as I know there are many other people, not just across the state, but right around the world, actually, because this event gained worldwide attention, and that's happening more and more, and it really came to a head when we had those fires over in the east of our state, that the rest of the world saw that there wasn't the response to wildlife that they expected, that the community expected. And so that worldwide attention then shifted to your neck of the woods, as it were. And so many people saw that you were there to care for so many of these koalas that were coming out of that particular property. And we couldn't save them all, but I thank you for the incredible work by you and your team, and that went towards so many of them recovering. And I know both myself and the listeners would love to hear how all of those animals are going.
I certainly didn't do it on my own, that's for sure. We still have quite a team of volunteers. They certainly do. They're actually thriving at the moment, even with the freezing cold weather they have had. I don't know if you remember Kevy, who was sort of like our pin-up girl. A lot of people didn't think Kevy would make it. She was very small and she was very cold and she was very wet. But she is now a big, fat koala. Don't often get fat koala. Kevy is definitely heading that way. She has thrived. She really has. So we weigh them every week, and weigh day was today, although Kevy's group got weighed a couple of days earlier because we got tough with them and they got moved out of their B&B quarters, which has the indoor section to it. There was objections from volunteers that were doing the outside ones and felt that the inside, the ones with the indoor-outdoor, weren't really toughening up, and it wasn't fair on theirs that were toughening up. So I went, right, okay, we'll kick them out. They're out in the weather. I mean, they were out in the weather anyway, but they would go into the shed when they could. So they're all out. They are all, I think there's only 2 that haven't hit 4 kilos yet, and they're not far off it. Even the teeny tiny, we had one that just was so small, but not necessarily young, but she was just very small. We call her Tiny, and even Tiny is doing quite well. So they're all doing really well now. That's not to say that we didn't have some hiccups with some of them that we did have a couple put down because they had serious issues and nobody could come up with a reason why other than stress. Stress, like post-traumatic stress type thing. We had a very loud noise when they emptied the skip, and it just seemed to be from them that point on that a couple of the koalas just went downhill. The animals that stayed here predominantly were the ones that sort of probably underwent the most stress, as in some of them were the littler ones that we were worried about are still here, but there's slightly bigger ones that were the last ones there, would have been subjected to more stress because they would have been subjected to several catch attempts. And with all the activity on the ground you would have seen the site when you were there with how many people were there. First 21 koalas that came in, DELT wasn't involved in that at all. So they only came in, I think, on Sunday. So we had several koalas in before that, and I think then the activity really became very busy out there. But for now, we have a Pudgy Kevi, and there's quite a lot of pudgy-looking koalas out there. So we're really happy. We are happy with the way they're going, but it's too cold to release now. So unfortunately, they're going to be in until the weather breaks. And of course, we have to find some good habitat to put them in. We've got a couple of private properties that we're hoping will be suitable, and when the weather gets a bit better, we will go and do a count to see how many koalas are already in that habitat. Yes, and definitely they'll be going to a far better place than they would have been had they not been removed from where they were.
And look, all of this work that you do and that the volunteers do there all requires money. That none of these things can be done for free.
No, not really.
No. Well, it's my experience that with just about all rescuers and carers is that, it becomes in most instances a full-time job, and one that they don't get paid for. So they sacrifice their time, their ability to earn an income, because they dedicate a large part of their lives to the care for these animals. And it's no different for yourself and your sanctuary. And I tried to do my part. I put in a budget bid for your sanctuary, which I hope will be successful. I was happy to. We're waiting with bated breath for the news on that. But can you tell me what that money would mean to you, and how you would be able to attribute that within the sanctuary to help these beautiful animals?
What we would really like to do next is to start some sort of community awareness thing happening. So really haven't had the time to think about how we'd do it, but I really believe that there is little point in us carers and volunteers continuing to break our necks for these animals if there is nowhere to put them. Our habitat is dwindling. There seems to be, concerningly, a disconnection between people and the environment. There seems to be this loss of understanding of how important the environment is to them, not just the animals that live in it, but, we breathe the air. We need the air to breathe, and the plants create it. So to try and create some sort of community awareness about just how important one single tree is. You cut down the tree, yes, it was putting the leaves in your gutter, but, all the birds have gone, the koala that used that gone. So many things go with a single tree, and to try and put a bit of pressure on local councils and shires to go back to restoring habitat and creating corridors and move. Like, we are in such a beautiful area where we are, and yet there is so little money spent on habitat protection, restoration, or anything like that. And where are we going to put them if there's nothing left? So that would be one of as everyone agrees, that would be one way that we would definitely go, is to try and build that so we've got a future for these animals.
Fantastic. And look, we're right about out of time, Tracy. So if you could leave our listeners with one thought today, what would it be?
Oh, wow.
No pressure.
Sorry, Andy. I should have thought about this one. One thought would be, please stop and take note of what's going on around you in the environment, because without you, there's little hope for the animals that live in there.
Sage words. They really are. Look, thanks so much for your time today. So much. Oh, pleasure. And look, and thanks so much for all the work that you do and that your volunteers do for wildlife. And look, keep up that good work, and
Thank
hopefully
you.
we can get some cash coming your way.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will pass on to the volunteers as well. We have amazing volunteers. They are just awesome. We love them to death. So we
Fantastic.
will pass it on. Thank you,
stuff.
and you take care.
I will. You too.
Good on you. Thanks, Andy. Bye
All
now.
right. Bye now.